Okay, right, this Torah portion's called Shelah-Lekha.
Is this?
Yeah. And this is basically when the Israelites have had the Torah at Sinai and now they're going to cross over into the Promised Land. And it starts off, Numbers 13. Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, "Send men to scout the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelite people. Send one man from each of their ancestral tribes, each one a chieftain among them." So they sent what's called a Siddiq, a righteous man from each one of the tribes. So Moses, by Yahweh's command, sent them out of the wilderness of Paran, all the men being leaders of the Israelites, and these were their names. From the tribe of Reuben, Shemua, son of Zakar. From the tribe of Simeon, Shaphat, son of Hori. From the tribe of Judah, Caleb, son of Jephunneh. From the tribe of Issachar, Igal, son of Joseph. From the tribe of Ephraim, Hosea, son of Nun. From the tribe of Benjamin, Palti, son of Raphu. From the tribe of Zebulun, Gadiel, son of Sodi. From the tribe of Joseph, namely the tribe of Manasseh, Gadi, son of Susi. From the tribe of Dan, Amiel, son of Gamali. From the tribe of Asher, Sethor, son of Michael. From the tribe of Naphtali, Nabi, son of Vopsi. From the tribe of Gad, Geuel, son of Makai. Now I mentioned there that from the tribe of Joseph, namely from the tribe of Manasseh, and the Levites aren't actually listed here. When the tribes are listed in scripture, there'll always be 12 tribes, even though the tribe of Joseph is split up into his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. But when they're listed, it'll always only be 12. So sometimes it says the tribe of Joseph, and that means Ephraim and Manasseh. And sometimes, like now, when the Levites aren't listed, it'll actually list Ephraim and Manasseh as separate tribes. And the 144,000 are listed in Revelation, the 12,000 from each tribe. There's 12 tribes listed then. Dan are actually omitted. And when Jacob was prophesying over Dan, he said, "Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that biteth the horse heels, so that his rider shall fall backward." And there's scholarly debate on why Dan isn't included, what exactly they did to offend Yahweh. But when it comes to Revelation, right in the end times, Dan are not included within Yahweh's people, but there are 12 tribes listed. Verse 16 says, "Those were the names of the men whom Moses sent to scout the land, but Moses changed the name of Hosea, son of Nun, to Joshua." So he added a yod to the front of his name. And this name Joshua, it's Yehoshua, and it means Yah saves. And it's actually Yeshua's name. In Hebrew, Yeshua's name was Yeshua. But if it was to be translated from Hebrew into English, it would be Joshua. The problem that we have is that the New Testament is translated into Greek. So it's gone from Hebrew to Greek, and it's Iousis in Greek. So when you go from Greek to English, it's translated as Jesus. The closest that they could get in Greek was Iousis, because of the letters that they used. So Jesus is a really inaccurate word. If we had a translation directly from Hebrew to English, it would be closer, it would be Joshua, but we call him Yeshua now. His name actually means Yah saves. Verse 17 says, "When Moses sent them to scout the land of Canaan, he said to them, 'Go up there into the Negeb and on into the hill country.'" Now some rabbis say that because Moses chose the scouts as opposed to Yahweh by lot, it was actually that caused the mistake. It should have all been in Moses' hands. He adds another bit in a second as well. It says, "And see what kind of country it is, Are the people who dwell in it strong or weak, few or many? Is the country in which they dwell good or bad? Are the towns they live in open or fortified? Is the soil rich or poor? Is it wooded or not? And take pains to bring back some of the fruit of the land. Now it happened to be the season of the first ripe grapes. So he's actually added there to what Yahweh's commanded him. Yahweh said, send scouts into the land, but Moses has added all these human interest that he wants to know personally, basically. He wants to know how strong, basically, is their situation, and is it a land that's flowing with milk and honey? Tell me about what the fruit that grows there is. Now that actually could be said to cause the problems when the spies come back. They're reporting a load of stuff that they think is important, because Moses has said, look at these things particularly. So Moses is implying that those things are important, but it's not what Yahweh's told them to do. Verse 21 says, they went up and scouted the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rahab at Lobo-Hamath. They went up into the Negeb and came to Hebron, where lived Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the Anakites. Now Hebron was founded 7 years before Zoan of Egypt. They reached the Wadi Eskol, and there they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. It had to be borne on a carrying frame by two of them, and some pomegranates and figs. So obviously the fact that it had to be a single cluster had to be carried between the two people shows that it was massive. And the people that they actually find in the land are giants. It says that place was named the Wadi Eskol because of the cluster that the Israelites cut down there, and Wadi Eskol just means cluster of grapes. At the end of the 40 days they returned from scouting the land. So they actually returned on the 9th of Av, and that is a date that's known amongst the Jewish people as a date of calamity. The things that happened on the 9th of Av, they were primarily to the Jewish people. Obviously this happened to all of the Israelites, but the destruction of the first temple happened on the 9th of Av in 586 BC, when the Babylonians conquered them and destroyed the temple. So that was obviously just the Jewish people that were in the land at that point, because the house of Israel had been taken by the king of Assyria about 150 years earlier. The destruction of the second temple as well happened on the 9th of Av. That was in 70 AD, when the Romans conquered them. In 135 AD, the Jews rebelled against Roman rule under the false messiah Simon Bar Kokhba, and were destroyed by Hadrian in the Battle of Batar. The Jews were expelled from England in 1290 on the 9th of Av, and they were expelled from Spain on the 9th of Av in 1492. So it's not a date that's got happy memories for them. Verse 26 says, they went straight to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran, and they made their report to them and to the whole community as they showed them the fruit of the land. So the spies come back, and instead of going to Moses and Aaron and making a report to them, they go and make the report in front of all of the people as well. And they actually, because it was a bad report that they gave, they made the people fearful. So the spies were blamed for making the people fearful because of their actions. If they'd just gone to Moses and Aaron, they could have said, this is the report, and then they could have decided how they were going to deliver it to the people. But the panic that they had was portrayed to the people. Verse 27 says, this is what they told him. We came to the land you sent us to. It does indeed flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who inhabit the country are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the Anakites there. The Anakites were the descendants of Ham. They were giants. Amalekites, who were also giants, dwell in the Negeb region. Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites inhabit the hill country, and Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. And these were all giant people. Now, the lineage from the pre-flood world came through Ham and came through Japheth as well. He came through Noah's sons' wives, but Ham begat Canaan, begat Amorius, and he was the father of the Amorites. And Amos 2:9 says this of the Amorites: "Yet destroyed I the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars, and he was strong as the oaks. Yet I destroyed his fruit from above, and his roots from beneath." And see the trees grow to 40 to 80 foot. So this guy, or this people, they were all massive. This is what they were faced with when they went into the land. And one of the Amorites was a guy called Arba, and he had a son named Anak, and he was the father of the Anakites, who were also obviously giants as well. Now, when they first went to Moses, they started by saying, "This is indeed a land flowing with milk and honey." So they were saying, Yahweh's right in what he's saying, but that still didn't increase their faith. They said, but all of the other things that you specified that we should look for, that's all going to go against us. Basically, we're fearful of these people. And Caleb was the only one that spoke out at this point. Verse 30 says, "Caleb hushed the people before Moses and said, 'Let us by all means go up, and we shall gain possession of it, for we shall surely overcome.'" So Caleb was the only one that demonstrated this faith. He was basically saying, look, Yahweh has told us that we're going to go into this land and conquer them. So what's the problem? We've all seen the stuff that Yahweh's done in the desert. You know, if he says that we're going to go in and he's going to give us the victory, then it's not going to be through our strength that we have the victory here. It's going to be through Yahweh. Verse 31 though says, "But the men who had gone up with him said, 'We cannot attack that people, for it is stronger than we.' Thus they spread calumnies among the Israelites." Calumnies is basically bad tidings. "About the land they had scouted, saying, 'The country that we traversed and scouted is one that devours its settlers. All the people that we saw in it are men of great size. We saw the Nephilim there, the Anakites as part of the Nephilim, and we looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, so we must have looked to them.'" So they were tiny in comparison to these people. But in verse 31 it says, "We cannot attack that people, for it is stronger than we." So instead of saying, well, Yahweh is stronger than anyone else, we're doing it on his strength. They said, we can't do it in our own strength, so we're not going to go into the land, we're not going to attack them. Numbers 14 starts with, "The whole community broke into loud cries, and the people wept that night. All the Israelites railed against Moses and Aaron. 'If only we had died in the land of Egypt,' the whole community shouted at them. 'Or if only we might die in this wilderness. Why is Yahweh taking us to that land to fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be carried off. It would be better for us to go back to Egypt.' And they said to one another, 'Let us head back to Egypt.'" So they've forgotten the bondage that they were in Egypt, or they preferred that bondage to what Yahweh was moving them into. They didn't have faith in him. Basically they said, well, this looks pretty tough, so perhaps we were better off in bondage to the Egyptians. And we can do the same thing now when we say, what Yahweh is asking me to do, it's pretty tough. Maybe I was better just being in the world. Maybe I was better in bondage to this sin than having to face this situation now, and it being tough for me facing persecution, or the people around me saying that I'm crazy. Verse 5 says, "Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembled congregation of Israelites, and Joshua son of Nun and Caleb son of Jephunneh, of those who had scouted the land, rent their clothes." So at this point Joshua gets off the fence. Previously Caleb had spoken out saying we should go into the land. The other 10 spies had said, we can't possibly defeat these giants. Joshua didn't say anything, but at this point he rents his clothes and he stands with Moses and Aaron and Caleb, and exhorted the whole Israelite community, "The land that we traversed and scouted is an exceedingly good land. If Yahweh is pleased with us, He will bring us into that land, the land that flows with milk and honey, and give it to us. Only you must not rebel against Yahweh. Have no fear then of the people of the country, for they are our prey. Their protection is departed from them, but Yahweh is with us. Have no fear of them. So they get it. They understand what Yahweh is saying to them. But it says here, you must not rebel against Yahweh. Have no fear of the country, for they are our prey. So it's us that are going to destroy them. We're the hunters in this situation. Whatever situation is in front of our eyes, that doesn't matter. We're certainly not the prey of these people. Yahweh didn't send us into this land to be their prey. They're going to die at our hands, basically. And that could only be said with faith. Without that faith, well, what in Hebrew is emunah, they couldn't possibly march into a land to be faced with a load of giants. And again, it's just like now. The enemy's forces are much greater than us. So if we were to look at the situation of we were faced with this demonic horde, then of course we'd say there's no way I can actually do this. And Yeshua said, count the cost of following him. He said, make sure that with an army of 10,000 you can go to meet the army of 20,000. He said basically, if you're outnumbered, make sure that you've got the faith to go and stand against that army.
So basically that's what I've been through, standing for Yahweh and facing the army. Really.
Absolutely, yeah. Or he says make terms of peace. So, you know, if you can't do it, then don't make it difficult for yourself. Just make terms of peace with the enemy. Verse 10 says, as the whole community threatened to pelt them with stones, the presence of Yahweh appeared in the tent of meeting to all the Israelites. And Yahweh said to Moses, how long will this people spurn me, and how long will they have no faith in me, despite all the signs that I have performed in their midst? So there was all of the plagues in Egypt. They saw Yahweh's power through. Then they saw all of the firstborn of the Egyptians being killed, and that Yahweh stopped their firstborn being killed by them putting the blood of the Passover lamb on the door lintels. Then they were being chased by Pharaoh's army, and Yahweh protected them from the arrows and from the pursuing attackers. And then they saw Yahweh split the Red Sea so that they could go through, and Pharaoh's army destroyed. Then they saw the bitter water being turned into the sweet water. They saw Moses bring forth water from a rock in the middle of the desert. So they'd seen a lot of stuff. They saw Yahweh's presence on Mount Sinai. They knew that he was real, but it doesn't matter that Yahweh will show himself to people. They can see all sorts of stuff, but unless it's actually in their heart, unless they've got that faith, then it's not going to make any difference to them. It's about the evilness that's in people's hearts. If they don't want to follow God, then they won't anyway, no matter what signs God gives to them. You hear a lot of people say nowadays, they say, oh well, why doesn't God just reveal himself? I believe in God if he just revealed himself. But these people were proof that when God does reveal himself, it doesn't matter. People are still going to complain and moan against Yahweh, because it's an issue of the heart. And Yahweh said to Moses, how long will this people spurn me, and how long will they have no faith in me, despite all the signs that I have performed in their midst? I will strike them with pestilence and disown them, and I will make of you a nation far more numerous than they. So what he's offering Moses here is to be the father of God's nation. He's offering him all of the prestige and all of the glory. He's saying, look, all these people who've been doing your head in thus far, I'll just wipe all of them out, and I'll make you the father of the nation. Everything will come from you, and you will be my people. This is what Moses says. But Moses said to Yahweh, when the Egyptians from whose midst you brought up this people in your might hear the news, they will tell it to the inhabitants of that land. Now they have heard that you, O Yahweh, are in the midst of this people, that you, O Yahweh, appear in plain sight when your cloud rests over them, and when you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and in a pillar of fire by night. If you then slay this people to a man, the nations who have heard of your fame will say, it must be because Yahweh was powerless to bring that people into the land he had promised them on oath, that he slaughtered them in the wilderness. Therefore I pray, let my Lord's forbearance be great, as you have declared, saying, Yahweh, slow to anger and abounding in kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgression, yet not remitting all punishment, but visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, upon the third and fourth generations. Pardon, I pray, the iniquity of this people, according to your great kindness, have you forgiven this people ever since Egypt. So, to Moses, the important thing was glorifying Yahweh's name. Now obviously, Yahweh knows that this is what he's going to do. When he says to Moses, I'll destroy this people, it's not for Yahweh's benefit. Moses doesn't then persuade him, oh, don't kill all these people. He knew that would be Moses' reaction, but by doing that, he's letting Moses realize that in a situation where it's choose the glory for yourself, to choose to be the father of the nation, or choose the glory of my name, Moses knows then that given that choice, he's going to choose Yahweh's name to glorify that. Because it's different us saying, yeah, I glorify Yahweh's name over choosing glory for myself, but until you're actually put in that position, then you don't know that you'd actually do that. So what Yahweh was doing was he was just giving Moses this opportunity to realize for himself that he would do that. Now Matthew 5:11 says, Blessed are ye, when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. So Moses was faced with these Israelites who basically wanted to kill him. They wanted to choose another leader and to go back to Egypt. But Yahweh says that he's blessed in doing that because he's doing it for his name's sake. Matthew 10:22 says, And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that endureth to the end shall be saved. So you'll notice that it doesn't say he that puts his hand up in a church and asks Jesus to come into his heart, he'll be saved. It says he that endureth to the end, he that faces all of this persecution for my name, he will be saved. Matthew 19:29 says, And everyone that hath forsaken houses, or brethren, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or child, or lands for my name's sake, he shall receive 100-fold, and shall inherit everlasting life. So if you think at this point, for the sake of Yahweh's name, Moses was forsaking being the father of a nation, and it says that you'll be rewarded 100-fold for that. I can't even imagine what Moses' reward is going to be, but obviously he's going to be pretty sorted in eternity. Verse 20, And Yahweh said, I pardon you, as you have asked. Nevertheless, as I live, and as Yahweh's presence fills the whole world, none of the men who have seen my presence and the signs that I've performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, and who have tried me these many times and have disobeyed me, shall see the land that I promised on oath to their fathers. None of those who spare me shall see it. So this is what Yahweh's actual punishment is. Moses says, that he's not remitting all punishment. Verse 24, But my servant Caleb, because he was imbued with a different spirit and remained loyal to me, him I will bring into the land. And he entered, and his offspring shall hold it as a possession. Now the Amalekites and the Canaanites occupy the valleys. Start out then tomorrow and march into the wilderness by way of the Sea of Reeds. So he orders them to go back into the wilderness. He just says, okay, so there's giants in the land, go and dwell in the wilderness. The punishment that he says to Moses is that they will never see the promised land that they were promised to their fathers. And it goes on and says, Yahweh spoke further to Moses and Aaron, how much longer shall that wicked community keep muttering against me? Very well, I have heeded the incessant mutterings of the Israelites against me. Say to them, as I live, says Yahweh, I will do to you just as you have urged me. In this very wilderness shall your carcasses drop. Of all of you who are recorded in your various lists from the age of 20 years up, you who have muttered against me, not one shall enter into the land which I swore to settle, save Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. Your children who you said would be carried off, these I will allow to enter. They shall know the land that you have rejected. So the age that he actually says that they're responsible from is the age of 20 up. And he says that because of the actions of the people, they will die in the wilderness. And that's the situation that Christians are in. If they don't make it through in faith to the promised land, they die in the wilderness. And the wilderness is, they've left Egypt. You know, they've seen the signs and wonders of God. But the wilderness that they're in now is knowing the power of God, knowing that God exists, and yet not being obedient, not having faith. So they're stuck in limbo. So the wilderness that they're in is just that. And this is the punishment that Yahweh inflicts for lack of faith. He says basically, you people are no use to me. You haven't got the faith that I need. I need you to just say, right, there's a problem. Yahweh's told us to deal with it this way. This is how we're going to deal with it. But without that, the people are no use to God. Verse 34. Verse 32, sorry. But your carcasses shall drop in this wilderness, while your children roam the wilderness for 40 years, suffering for your faithlessness, until the last of your carcasses is down in the wilderness. So Moses said again that Yahweh's character is to punish the children of those who transgress his law, those who commit iniquity. And this is what we see here. Verse 34 says, you shall bear your punishment for 40 years, corresponding to the number of days, 40 days, that you scouted the land, a year for each day. Thus you shall know what it means to thwart me. This is the first time that we see here the day for a year principle. It's all throughout the Bible. Like when Ezekiel's told to lie on his side for 390 days to signify the punishment that the house of Israel face when they have the 390 years of punishment. Verse 35 says, I, Yahweh, have spoken. Thus will I do to all that wicked band that is banded together against me. In this very wilderness they shall die to the last man. As for the men whom Moses sent to scout the land, those who came back and caused the whole community to mutter against him by spreading calumnies about the land, those who spread such calumnies about the land died of plague by the will of Yahweh. So this is an immediate punishment here for the spies that have come back and basically led the people of Israel astray. And when we see in the Old Testament Yahweh having these very severe punishments, it's basically because all of the Israelites were affected by the decisions of these people, by what they were doing. They were leading the whole of Israel astray. And nowadays, we're not going to lead the whole of Israel astray. We might lead certain people astray, but Yahweh has to respond very sharply and very severely to these things happening, because he's basically saying, look, you're in danger of turning all my people against me and sending them back to Egypt. I'm going to have a very harsh punishment so that they can learn by your mistakes. Of those men who have gone to scout the land, only Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, survived, the two spies that brought the good report. When Moses repeated these words to all the Israelites, the people were overcome by grief. So when Moses had basically told them that they were to live out the rest of the days in the wilderness, they were upset by this. They weren't upset that they didn't have faith in God. They were upset that it was going to affect their lives in some way. Verse 40 says, early next morning they set out towards the crest of the hill country, saying, we are prepared to go up to the place that Yahweh has spoken of, for we were wrong. But Moses said, why do you transgress Yahweh's command? This will not succeed. So they were prepared to go up anyway. They didn't understand that it was Yahweh being with them that was the thing that was going to give them the victory. They're fully stuck within the physical world. They didn't have any kind of spiritual faith in Yahweh. They said, okay, well, since our punishment now is to die in the wilderness, we'll do what he says. But again, it's not them doing it through faith. Verse 42 says, do not go up lest you be routed by your enemies, for Yahweh is not in your midst. For the Amalekites and the Canaanites will be there to face you, and you will fall by the sword, inasmuch as you have turned from following Yahweh, and Yahweh will not be with you. In verse 44, you see that they still didn't get it. Moses was explaining to them at that point, don't transgress Yahweh's command. He's not in your midst. He's not going to be with you. The Amalekites and the Canaanites are going to destroy you. And verse 44 says, yet defiantly they marched towards the crest of the hill country, though neither Yahweh's Ark of the Covenant nor Moses stirred from the camp. And the Amalekites and the Canaanites who dwelt in that hill country came down and dealt them a shattering blow at Hormah. So they didn't get that they had to have faith in Yahweh, and the result of that was that they were wiped out, and that was the example to the rest of the Israelites. And Numbers 15 seems a bit bizarre. Just after these people have been destroyed, a load of laws are given about bringing an acceptable offering to Yahweh. And it makes sense that just after they've learned the wrong way to do it, that they learn the right way to do it, what Yahweh really expected. Now these things seem fairly specific, but the thing that Yahweh is looking for isn't the physical act, because he's the creator God. If he wanted all of these offerings before him, if that was what was pleasing for him, he could have an infinity of offerings before him. That's not what's pleasing to him. The thing that's pleasing to him is that people follow the precise instructions in bringing the offerings. It's their obedience which is pleasing to him. So when he says something that's very specific, it makes a difference in someone's heart. It talks about adding half a hin of wine or a third of a hin of wine. Now if somebody's preparing an offering and it's an offering that's supposed to have a third of a hin of wine on it, and they put half a hin of wine on it shows a difference in their heart if they say, oh, it's going to cost me to prepare another offering now, surely this is fine, I'll just do it this way, to someone who says, oh, that offering's not right now, it's not what Yahweh's asked for, so it's not what I'm going to bring, even though it's going to cost me to prepare another offering, that's what I'm going to do. So it's obedience that's pleasing. Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I am giving you to settle in, and will present an offering by fire to Yahweh from the herd or from the flock, be it burnt offering or sacrifice, in fulfillment of a vow explicitly uttered, or as a free will offering at your fixed occasions, producing an odour pleasing to Yahweh. The person who presents the offering to Yahweh shall bring as a meal offering a tenth of a measure of choice flour, with a quarter of a hin of oil mixed in. You shall also offer with the burnt offering or with the sacrifice a quarter of a hin of wine as a libation for each sheep. In the case of a ram, you shall present as a meal offering 2/10 of a measure of choice flour with a third of a hin of oil mixed in, and a third of a hin of wine as a libation, as an offering of pleasing odour to Yahweh. And if it is an animal from the herd that you offer to Yahweh as a burnt offering or as a sacrifice in fulfillment of a vow explicitly uttered, or as an offering of well-being, there shall be offered a meal offering along with the animal 3/10 of a measure of choice flour with half a hin of oil mixed in, and as libation you shall offer half a hin of wine, these being offerings by fire of pleasing odour to Yahweh. This shall be done with each ox, with each ram, and with any sheep or goat. As many as you offer, you shall do thus with each one, as many as there are. So people look at this sort of thing, and they look at us following the commandments, and they say, that's legalistic. But it's not legalistic, it's following God's law. So it's a legal action as opposed to it being illegal. But to someone whose heart isn't circumcised, to someone who doesn't care about following God's law, they're just going to see it as petty, because their obedience isn't important to them, and they don't realise their obedience is important to Yahweh. They don't really want to do things as He's specified to do it. They want to be in their flesh, and they want to do things as suits them. Verse 14 says, and when throughout the ages a stranger who has taken up residence with you, or one who lives among you, will present an offering by fire of pleasing odour to Yahweh, as you do, so shall it be done. The rest of the congregation, there shall be one law for you, and for the resident stranger. It shall be a law for all time throughout the ages. You and the stranger shall be alike before Yahweh. Yahweh has one law. He doesn't change from people group to people group. This wasn't a law that was given to the Israelites in the desert, and it doesn't matter to spiritual Israel now. This is Yahweh's character. It's eternal. It's always going to be the same. And He said, even if the people aren't Israelites and they're living amongst you, make sure that they follow my law, because these are my requirements. Verse 16 says, the same ritual and the same rule shall apply to you and to the stranger who resides among you. So even if you take the theology of Jews and Gentiles, even if you take that as true, the Gentiles are the strangers that are among Yahweh's people, and it says that it will be the same law for them, and it will be the same law for all time. Verse 17 says, Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land to which I am taking you, and you eat of the bread of the land, you shall set some aside as a gift to Yahweh. As the first yield of your baking, you shall set aside a loaf as a gift. You shall set it aside as a gift, like the gift from the threshing floor. You shall make a gift to Yahweh from the first yield of your baking throughout the ages. If you unwittingly fail to observe any one of the commandments that Yahweh has declared to Moses, anything that Yahweh has enjoined upon you through Moses from the day that Yahweh gave the commandment and on through the ages. And so what it specifies now is ignorant sin. You've got a group of people who want to please Yahweh. Now, if they've done something by accident that's wrong, Yahweh's telling them, look, be obedient in this way, and it's okay. Verse 23 says, anything that Yahweh has enjoined upon you through Moses from the day that Yahweh gave the commandment and on through the ages, if this was done unwittingly through the inadvertence of the community, the whole community shall present one bull of the herd as a burnt offering of pleasing odour to Yahweh, and with its proper meal offering and libation, and one he-goat as a sin offering. The priest shall make expiation for the whole Israelite community, and they shall be forgiven, for it was an error, and for their error they have brought their offering, an offering by fire to Yahweh, and their sin offering before Yahweh. So if the people did something by mistake, they had the chance then to show Yahweh that they had faith in Him, that they wanted to obey His commands by obeying these specific things that Yahweh said to do. And they didn't have to do that. They could have committed the sin by error. But Yahweh says, if you do that, then do these things. So that again shows the heart. When these people are stood before Yahweh, if Yahweh's given them an instruction to follow, to do in the case that they've made an error, and they've chosen not to do that thing, then that shows the heart, and they're going to have to explain that to Yahweh. But on the other hand, if they've actually done, if they've made reparations to Yahweh, then that again shows the heart. Verse 26 says, "The whole Israelite community and the stranger residing among them shall be forgiven, for it happened to the entire people through error. In case it is an individual who has sinned unwittingly, he shall offer a she-goat in its first year as a sin offering. The priest shall make expiation before Yahweh on behalf of that person who erred, for he sinned unwittingly, making such expiation for him that he may be forgiven. For the citizen among the Israelites and for the stranger who resides among them, you shall have one ritual for anyone who acts in error. But the person, be he citizen or stranger, who acts defiantly, reviles Yahweh, that person shall be cut off from among his people, because he has spurned the word of Yahweh and violated his commandment. That person shall be cut off. He bears his guilt." So there's a difference there in heart between someone who's done it in error and someone who does it defiantly, unrepentantly, and it says that he spurns the word of Yahweh, because he knows the word of Yahweh, and yet he chooses that he is going to sit in judgment of it, basically. So when you get people saying things like, well, what about in this situation? Does the law still apply in this situation? What they're actually doing is they're sitting in judgment of Yahweh and saying, your law is not good enough. I can sit here and think of situations where it couldn't apply. It's not having faith in Yahweh and saying, I'm going to follow that law, and I'm just going to have faith that you're going to make it okay for me. It's a completely different heart. And it says the one that acts defiantly reviles Yahweh. So he's actually saying to Yahweh, I'm better than you. I will make the choice here, not you. Verse 32 says, "Once when the Israelites were in the wilderness, they came upon a man gathering wood on the Sabbath day. Those who found him as he was gathering wood brought him before Moses, Aaron, and the whole community. He was placed in custody, for it had not been specified what should be done to him." So there was no Torah on if someone's gathering wood on the Sabbath day, or if someone's breaking the Sabbath day, what the punishment is to be. So they come to Moses and Aaron, and they go to Yahweh. Then Yahweh said to Moses, "The man shall be put to death. The whole community shall pelt him with stones outside the camp." So the whole community took him outside the camp and stoned him to death, as Yahweh had commanded Moses. So this just shows how important the Sabbath is to Yahweh. He says that this man who's been caught, again it shows the heart. He might have had Satan whispering in his ear and saying, oh, these people are resting now, you can put yourself ahead a bit, you need that money, why don't you just break the Sabbath day and it'll all be cool. And this guy is acting defiantly to Yahweh, right after the verse when it says that he who acts defiantly reviles Yahweh and spurns his word. So it's an illustration of exactly how severe that is to Yahweh, because we might think from our position it's not that bad, because sin is deceitful. Verse 36. So the whole community took him outside the camp and stoned him to death, as Yahweh commanded Moses. Yahweh said to Moses as follows, "Speak to the Israelite people and instruct them to make themselves tassels on the corners of their garments throughout the ages. Let them attach a cord of blue to the tassel at each corner." Right, so he's saying this is really important. If you act defiantly, you revile Yahweh, and that is the punishment for it.
I forgot to put mine on.
Well, that's it.
But I didn't mean not to put them on. Like.
Yeah, you're not acting defiantly, are you? You're not saying,
wear them
right,
every day.
I'm not going to wear them.
I wear them every day.
That's the first situation.
I wore them for court.
Well, Yahweh says, if you're acting defiantly towards me, that isn't acceptable. He says, wear the tzitzit as a reminder that we're to follow Yahweh's commandments. He actually gives us something. He's not just dealt with this person harshly. He says, right, instruct the Israelite people to put something on the corners of their garments so that they can remember. And people will say, well, that was just relevant to the Israelites. It's not relevant today. We don't have to do it. But it's more relevant today. Think of all of the things in the world
that are sinful,
that cause us to think sinful things. It says, that shall be your tassel. Look at it and recall all the commandments of Yahweh and observe them, that you do not follow your heart and eyes in your lustful edge. So when people say, I'm just going to follow my heart, that's the right thing to do, surely. You get a lot of Christians even that say it. It says right here, wear the tassels that you don't follow your heart and you seek after the commandments of Yahweh. They're the words of life. Now, all about us in our culture are things, temptations. It was much less so for the Israelites in the desert. So the idea that this isn't relevant anymore just holds no water at all. It's so much more important for us to have something that we can focus on to remind us who is our Lord. I know these have helped me many times in looking at them to focus. I know times that I've fallen as well. I've not looked at the tzitzit, so it's very, very important for us in our walk. Verse 40 says, yes, you shall be reminded to observe all my commandments and to be holy to your God. And this is another thing as well. They make us holy, they make us set apart to our God. Nobody else in society is wearing the tassels that we wear. So when people look at us, they can actually see that Yahweh is our God, that we're doing this to observe his commandments. Verse 41 says, I, Yahweh, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I, Yahweh, your God. And this is another example of a Hebrew parallelism here. Now, I can't think of another time in the scripture that something's reiterated 3 times apart from holy, holy, holy. And the seventh day Sabbath, he reiterates that 3 times as well. So the passage before this, the guy gathering sticks, shows us how important the Sabbath is. The passage after it, it's the tassels, and then he says, I, Yahweh, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I, Yahweh, your God. It's important to him that we realise that he is our God, that we wear these and we can focus our minds on the fact that he's our God, because it's easy to just slip away into life happening. These are to bring our focus and our attention back on it. Okay, shall we pray? Father, I thank you for your word. I thank you for your Torah, that you can bring these instructions to us and you can emphasize what is important to us and to you, to make our relationship strong, to give us the guidelines that we need to live in a righteous way, to live in a holy, separated way for you. I thank you that it means that much to you, that you've given us your word, that you've created us to be in relationship with you, and that if we just trust and obey and have faith in you, that you will bless us. Amen.
Amen.